Welcome to Crime and Consequence. Before the horrors of betrayal took over her life, Hannah Petty was the epitome of what many would call an ordinary young woman, but in the best possible sense. She was 25 years old, living in a peaceful suburban community, and had everything that most people aspire to: a loving family, a husband, and a young child she adored. Her role as a mother was central to her life. She was fiercely dedicated to her son, always making sure he had everything he needed, both materially and emotionally. Friends and family described her as a loving, devoted parent who never missed an opportunity to nurture and support her child. She wasn't just a mother, she was the kind of mom who would take the time to bake cookies for school events or stay up late crafting creative birthday gifts. To her family, she was a source of warmth, always putting others first. Her marriage to Brian Mann seemed, at least on the surface, to be the kind of partnership many would envy. As a chiropractor, Brian Mann was a well-respected professional in their community. He was seen as a provider, a protector, the kind of man people trusted with their health and well-being. Hannah, like many women in relationships, trusted her husband deeply, believing him to have her best interests at heart. Hannah's life was filled with what many would call normal family struggles, juggling work and home life, balancing the demands of a young child with a relationship that required attention. She loved her family fiercely and lived every day with the idea of giving them a future full of happiness, stability, and love. However, unbeknownst to Hannah, her world was beginning to unravel in the most horrific way possible, all orchestrated by the one person she trusted most. Behind closed doors, Brian was not just her partner, he was the silent architect of her suffering. He wasn't just poisoning her physical health with deceitful supplements, but he was quietly, slowly, and deliberately destroying the life they had built together. For months, Brian had been giving Hannah pills that he claimed were for her health, supposedly supplements that would boost her immune system and help her feel better. In reality, they were laced with lead, a toxic substance that caused severe harm to her body. Hannah was unknowingly swallowing a slow-acting poison, placed in her hands by the very person she trusted the most. This wasn't a sudden act of violence, this was a carefully planned form of control, executed over time. As her health deteriorated, Brian continued to hide the truth from her, keeping her in the dark about the poisoning while using his position as her trusted husband and healthcare provider to manipulate her trust. He kept assuring her that everything was fine, telling her that the sickness she felt was just part of a healing process, a classic tactic of gaslighting. While Hannah fought to stay alive, Brian had something far more sinister in mind. He had taken out 5 life insurance policies on her, without her knowledge, totaling $1.3 million. In his twisted mind, Hannah's death was not only inevitable but also financially beneficial. Her suffering wasn't just part of a plan to control her, it was part of a cold calculation that would secure his future without her. Hannah was unknowingly playing a role in his financial scheme, all while trying to navigate her deteriorating health, unaware that the very man she trusted was the one leading her down this horrific path. Brian claimed that these pills would help Hannah feel better, make her stronger, and even cure some of the lingering fatigue she had been feeling. He told her it was a part of a wellness process, a way to improve her health and keep her in peak physical condition. After all, he was her husband and health expert, she trusted him completely. But what Hannah didn't know was that the pills weren't supplements at all. They were laced with lead, a toxic substance that gradually builds up in the body and can cause severe poisoning when consumed over time. Lead poisoning can have devastating physical effects, ranging from severe abdominal pain to brain damage, and in some cases, even death. At first, the signs of the poisoning were subtle. Hannah experienced fatigue, which she dismissed as a result of stress, a heavy work schedule, or perhaps just the demands of motherhood. She felt nauseous at times but assumed it was simply a digestive issue. Then came the unexplained weight loss. Hannah lost over 40 pounds in a short period, and it started to become noticeable to friends and family. But Brian reassured her, telling her that her body was simply going through a detoxification process. He downplayed her symptoms, reassuring her that this was all normal, even as she began to feel weaker and weaker. The isolation of hurting. As weeks passed, the symptoms worsened, but the man who should have been protecting her was instead telling her to persevere. He fed her lies, telling her that it was all part of the healing process. This emotional manipulation played on her trust and made it difficult for her to even consider the possibility that something sinister was happening. Her nausea became more frequent. She started experiencing severe headaches and dizziness. Abdominal pain became constant. But when she tried to voice her concerns to Brian, he would brush them off. The more she suffered, the more she was convinced that this was just something she had to ride out. The slow degradation of her health was like a creeping fog, clouding her judgment, making her doubt what was happening to her. And Brian? He was right there, watching her decline, all while continuing to feed her the toxic pills that he knew were poisoning her. As her health continued to deteriorate, the physical signs of poisoning became impossible to ignore. But even then, Brian kept her isolated, convincing her that the symptoms weren't serious enough to seek medical attention. He even discouraged her from going to the doctor, offering more excuses and reassurances. Eventually, Hannah couldn't ignore it anymore. Her body was fighting back in ways she could no longer deny. Yet, by then, she was already deeply dependent on Brian's assurances. The psychological manipulation had worked. She trusted him more than she trusted her own instincts. Over the course of several months, she experienced an array of troubling symptoms, including chronic fatigue, nausea, dizziness, and general weakness. Initially, these symptoms were brushed off as something minor, but as they worsened, she grew increasingly concerned. Hannah's family, noticing her deteriorating condition, urged her to seek medical attention. After several visits to different doctors and countless tests, the cause of her symptoms remained a mystery. It wasn't until she was referred to a specialist that the truth started to emerge. Medical tests, including blood work, eventually revealed that she had been poisoned with lead. Her condition had become so severe that she was rushed to the hospital for urgent care. It was there that doctors confirmed the poisoning, and suspicions began to rise about the cause. As Hannah Petty recovered in the hospital, doctors and law enforcement were scrambling to uncover how she had ended up in such a critical condition. Her blood lead levels were shockingly high, and the suspicion of poisoning led investigators to focus their efforts on her husband, Brian Mann. At first, the authorities were uncertain. After all, Brian was her husband, a trusted professional who seemed like he should have been the one helping her. But the more they dug into their lives, the more inconsistencies they uncovered, and soon, the pieces started to fall into place. The first major break came when detectives uncovered 5 life insurance policies Brian had taken out on Hannah, without her knowledge. These policies totaled an astounding $1.3 million. This discovery sent a chill down investigators' spines. Why would Brian, a man who claimed to love his wife, take out such massive policies on her life? It was clear that if something happened to her, he stood to gain financially. This was no longer just a case of a wife falling ill, it was starting to look like a carefully planned scheme. The authorities were now focused on motive. Brian had a clear financial incentive for her death, and the life insurance policies suddenly seemed like a calculated step in a larger plot. But the most shocking discovery came next. Investigators found evidence that Brian had been poisoning Hannah for months. The pills he had given her, which he had presented as health supplements, were laced with lead. This wasn't just a random act. It wasn't a mistake. The lead had been deliberately introduced into her system. The detectives learned that Brian had been giving her these pills regularly, under the guise of helping her improve her health. He convinced her that they were necessary for her immune system and that she needed to stick with the regimen. Even more chillingly, when Hannah started showing signs of illness, nausea, weight loss, extreme fatigue, Brian actively discouraged her from seeing a doctor. He played the role of a concerned husband, but all the while, he knew exactly what was happening. He was manipulating her into trusting him completely, making her feel like the sickness was just something she had to ride out. The investigators uncovered text messages and records of Brian's communications where he repeatedly reassured Hannah that this was all part of the process, further preventing her from seeking help. The emotional manipulation was as much a part of the poisoning as the lead itself. As the investigation continued, something even more sinister emerged. When Brian was arrested and interrogated, he attempted to cover his tracks by claiming that he had also been poisoned by the same lead-laced pills. Brian's defense was a desperate attempt to shift the narrative. He claimed that he, too, had ingested small amounts of lead to make it appear that they were both victims of poisoning. He wanted to paint himself as an innocent husband who was just as much a victim as his wife. But investigators weren't fooled. They saw through his charade. They understood the timeline, the evidence, and the facts. Brian's actions had been premeditated. The pills hadn't been a mistake, they were a weapon. The life insurance policies hadn't been a coincidence, they were part of a financial plan. His deceit was not an afterthought but the final, desperate attempt to cover up his calculated crime. Brian Mann was caught after authorities tracked his movements and arrested him on July 6, 2022, as he attempted to re-enter the U.S. from Mexico. Investigators had gathered evidence that he had poisoned his wife, Hannah Petty, with lead over time in an attempt to collect life insurance money. The investigation revealed that he had been researching ways to poison someone and had made fraudulent attempts to claim life insurance payouts. During the trial, the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including toxicology reports that confirmed lead poisoning and Brian's attempts to cover his tracks. His defense was unable to refute the evidence, and the jury convicted him on all charges, including attempted murder, poisoning, and fraud. Brian was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, with the judge highlighting the cruelty of his actions and the lasting impact on Hannah's family. The verdict brought justice, though it could never fully heal the emotional scars left by his betrayal. Hannah Petty was not just an act of betrayal, it was an attempt to turn her life into a payout. But in the end, no matter how deep he dug to cover his tracks, the truth always finds a way to surface. His arrest, trial, and eventual life sentence serve as a powerful reminder that justice has a way of catching up with those who think they can get away with murder. Hannah's family, though forever scarred by this tragedy, can now take solace in knowing that Brian will pay for his heinous actions. This case proves that even in the darkest moments, truth and justice will prevail. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts on this haunting story. While the legal battle was over, for Hannah, the road to recovery was just beginning. She had survived not only the physical toll of poisoning but also the emotional scars left by the betrayal of her husband. She found strength in her resilience and the support of her family and friends. In January 2023, she took to social media to express her gratitude for the survival of both her life and her sense of self. She acknowledged the lasting effects of her trauma but vowed to keep moving forward for herself and her son. Her message was clear: no one should ever endure what she did, and help is always available for those who feel trapped in toxic relationships.